She suspended my kids from the neighborhood pool for a rule that didn't exist. And within an hour, their names were taped to the clubhouse wall under disciplinary action. It started on a Saturday afternoon. Bright sun, crowded deck chairs, the sound of splashing and inflatable rafts slapping the water. My two kids were in the shallow end, tossing a foam ball back and forth, laughing every time it skipped off the surface. I was sitting under a faded blue umbrella near the lifeguard stand when I noticed the HOA board president marching across the pool deck in wedge sandals and oversized sunglasses. She didn't glance at anyone else. She walked straight to the lifeguard. She pointed toward my kids. The lifeguard climbed down from his chair, walked to the edge of the pool, and blew one short whistle. My son froze mid-throw. My daughter lowered the ball slowly. "Out of the pool, please," he said, avoiding eye contact. They waded toward the steps, confused. I stood up immediately, water dripping from their shoulders as they reached me. "What's going on?" I asked. The HOA board president stepped forward before the lifeguard could answer. "Your children violated quiet hours. This is the second complaint." "Quiet hours? It was 4:15 p.m. They were throwing a foam ball," I replied. She folded her arms. "We've had repeated noise concerns. The board has authority to suspend access privileges under discretionary enforcement." Two residents nearby stopped mid-conversation and stared. A woman on a lounge chair leaned up on her elbows. The atmosphere shifted instantly from casual summer afternoon to public accusation. My daughter squeezed the towel around her shoulders. "Dad, we weren't yelling," she whispered. The HOA president didn't address her. Instead, she turned to the lifeguard. "Deactivate their keycards, effective immediately." The lifeguard hesitated. "Right now?" "Yes, now." He walked back to the clubhouse office, and through the glass window I could see him typing at the small computer terminal beside the snack fridge. I felt eyes on us from every direction. Within minutes, my kids' names were written in black marker on a white sheet of paper and taped to the bulletin board near the vending machines. "Pool privileges suspended, pending review." My son saw it first. "Dad, that's us." The paper fluttered slightly in the air conditioning vent. Three teenagers standing by the soda machine glanced up at it, then at my kids. I walked back outside, steady but controlled. "What specific rule did they violate?" I asked. She didn't hesitate. "Section 8.3, Quiet Enjoyment Clause." "Can you show me that?" "It falls under board discretion," she replied. "You'll receive formal notice." Behind her, a man closed his umbrella slowly and whispered something to his wife. Another resident picked up her pool bag and left. Security arrived 10 minutes later. Not police, just the contracted neighborhood guard in a gray polo shirt. He stood by the gate. "I've been instructed to deny access to these two minors," he said carefully.
My kids stood beside me as families continued swimming. The splash sounds felt louder now, more noticeable. "Pack up," I told them gently. We gathered our towels and sandals while the HOA president remained seated at a patio table, sunglasses back on as if the matter were settled. At the exit gate, my daughter tapped her keycard against the reader out of habit. Red light. Access denied. She looked up at me. "It's okay," I said, but it wasn't. That evening, neighbors were still at the pool. We could hear laughter drifting over the fence from our backyard. My son bounced a basketball against the driveway in short, irritated bursts. My daughter sat on the porch steps, scrolling silently. Then my phone buzzed. An email from the HOA. Subject: Notice of immediate suspension, amenity privileges. It stated that my children had violated community quiet hours and that the board exercised its discretionary authority to suspend access pending a formal review. No hearing date listed, no evidence attached, just suspension. I opened the HOA's online resident portal and pulled up the community handbook. I scrolled straight to Section 8. There was no 8.3 Quiet Enjoyment Clause for pool noise. Section 8 covered parking. I searched for quiet hours. Nothing about minors, Nothing about afternoon restrictions, only standard 10 p.m. exterior noise limits for amplified music. The next morning, I drove past the clubhouse. Through the glass doors, I could see the bulletin board again. The suspension notice was still posted. 2 residents stood reading it. One shook his head slowly. This wasn't just about swimming anymore. It was public discipline without a hearing. That afternoon, I watched from my car as my kids walked up to the pool gate again, hopeful. They tried their cards. Red light. The security guard stepped forward and blocked the entrance. "I'm sorry," he said. Other children swam behind him. A beach ball bounced off the water. A mother adjusted sunscreen on her toddler. My kids turned around quietly and walked back toward me. That was the moment I knew this wasn't going away on its own. If there was a rule, I'd find it. If there wasn't, I'd prove it. And the only question left was this: how many other discretionary rules had been enforced without anyone checking?
By Monday morning, the suspension had already reshaped the neighborhood dynamic. As I drove past the clubhouse on my way to work, I saw 2 residents standing at the bulletin board again. One of them pointed directly at the printed notice with my children's names. The paper had been laminated overnight. That detail bothered me more than anything. Inside the pool area, maintenance staff were pressure washing the deck. The sharp spray echoed against the concrete. The suspended pending review notice was still taped to the interior side of the glass doors, visible from outside. Public display, public assumption. That afternoon, my kids walked home from a friend's house carrying wet towels. "We weren't even loud," my son said, tossing his sandals onto the porch. "People were blasting music Saturday." My daughter nodded. "The group near the deep end had a speaker." I remembered that. A portable Bluetooth speaker had been sitting on a folding table near the diving board. Music had been playing, not excessively loud, but definitely louder than 2 kids tossing a foam ball. I opened my laptop at the kitchen table. First step, documentation. I logged into the resident portal and downloaded the latest copy of the HOA rulebook. I checked the footer. Revised March 2022. Then I pulled up the archived version from 2 years prior. Same footer, same revision date. No updates since. There was no Section 8.3 quiet enjoyment clause, no pool-specific quiet hours, and more importantly, under disciplinary procedures, it clearly stated, residents are entitled to written notice and opportunity for hearing prior to suspension of privileges. No hearing had occurred, no warning, just immediate deactivation. Outside, a car horn sounded. I looked out the window and saw the HOA president walking across the parking lot near the clubhouse, clipboard tucked under her arm. She gestured toward the access panel. The guard nodded. I drove down there immediately. When I stepped into the pool area, the chlorine smell was strong, and 3 teenagers were doing cannonballs into the deep end. The splash echoed sharply. The security guard stood by the entrance podium. "I need to understand something. Who authorized the deactivation?" He replied. "The board president instructed management." "Was there a written violation?" He hesitated. "I just follow instructions." At that moment, a resident entered behind me and tapped her keycard. Green light, access granted. My daughter had stood in that same spot the day before and received a red denial. I walked around the perimeter of the pool deck. The Bluetooth speaker was back. Same folding table near the diving board. Music playing. 2 adults laughing loudly as they adjusted lounge chairs. No enforcement. No quiet hour warning. The HOA president sat under a large striped umbrella, speaking with another board member. She noticed me, but didn't wave. Instead, she pulled out her phone. 5 minutes later, my email notification pinged. Reminder, suspended residents are not permitted on pool premises. I looked around. My kids weren't even there. This wasn't about noise, it was about asserting control. That evening, I called the property management company listed on the HOA website. After a long hold, a representative answered. I need the official rulebook revision history for the community, I said, including any amendments related to pool quiet hours. There was a pause as she typed. I'm not seeing any amendments regarding quiet hours, she said. The last rules update was March 2022. Has the board enacted any emergency provisions? No, sir. Those would require documented vote approval. Documented vote. That phrase stuck with me. The next morning, I returned to the clubhouse before work. The maintenance crew was unlocking storage cabinets. I watched as one employee opened a small metal panel beside the pool office. Inside was the keycard control system. Rows of blinking green LEDs. Each resident's access tied to that panel. It wasn't just symbolic. Someone had physically toggled my kids' privileges off. I took out my phone and recorded a short video of the access terminal from the public side of the doorway. No interference, just visible documentation that the system was operational. Later that afternoon, my daughter asked, "Are we going to the hearing?" "What hearing?" my son added. Exactly. There had been no hearing scheduled. Yet the notice still said pending review. Pending what? That evening, as the sun dipped low over the pool fence, I drove by once more. The laminated notice had been moved. Now it was taped directly beside the snack vending machine, eye level, more visible than before. 2 kids stood in line for sodas, reading it. The suspension wasn't temporary discipline, it was public example setting, and if I didn't challenge it properly, it would become precedent. The question now wasn't whether a rule existed. The question was this: if no rule existed, who had the authority to create one on the spot?
By midweek, the suspension had taken on a life of its own. Tuesday afternoon, I parked across from the clubhouse and watched the usual after-school rush. Backpacks dropped onto lounge chairs, towels unrolled across concrete, a lifeguard adjusting the height of the umbrella over his stand. My kids stood beside me at the gate. "Just try it again," my son said quietly. My daughter pressed her keycard against the reader. Red light. A short, flat denial beep. At that exact moment, 2 other kids ran past us and tapped their cards. Green, green. The contrast was impossible to ignore. A small group of parents noticed. One woman tilted her sunglasses down and glanced between my kids and the access screen. The security guard stepped forward again, clipboard tucked under his arm. "I've been told to document any attempt to enter," he said, writing down the time. "Document it," I replied calmly. Behind him, the Bluetooth speaker near the diving board was back again, louder than before. A group of adults clapped as someone attempted a backflip into the deep end. The splash echoed across the fence line. No whistle, no enforcement. My daughter looked at me. "They're louder than we were." I nodded. And that was when I realized something important. If this was about quiet hours, enforcement would be consistent. If it wasn't consistent, it was selective. That evening, I reviewed the HOA handbook again, this time slowly, line by line. Under Amenity Privilege Suspension, one clause stood out. Suspension requires written notice and opportunity for hearing within 10 days. It had been 4 days already. No hearing date, no evidence summary, just the public posting. I emailed the property management company again. "Can you confirm whether a formal disciplinary hearing has been scheduled?" I wrote. The response came the next morning. "We have not received documentation initiating a hearing request for this matter." Not received documentation, meaning the process hadn't even started. Later that day, something happened that shifted everything. My son's friend texted him a photo. It was the laminated suspension notice, but someone had circled the phrase "Quiet Enjoyment Clause" in red pen and written in small letters underneath, "Where?" The photo had already been shared in the neighborhood chat.
I drove to the clubhouse immediately. Inside the lobby, 3 residents stood near the bulletin board discussing it. One of them pointed to the handbook copy sitting on the side table and flipped through pages quickly. "I don't see that section either," he muttered.
The HOA president walked in from the pool deck at that exact moment. She froze when she saw the small crowd. "Is there a problem?" she asked evenly. A resident held up the handbook. "Can you show us the clause you cited?" Her expression tightened. "It falls under board discretion," she said again. "The board has authority to preserve community standards." "But there's no citation," another resident replied, "and suspension requires a hearing." The atmosphere shifted, not chaotic, but questioning. She reached up and removed the laminated notice from the board. "For privacy reasons," she said sharply. Then she walked into the management office and shut the door. From outside the glass, I could see her speaking rapidly on the phone, gesturing toward the access control panel beside the desk. That evening, my email pinged again. Subject: formal hearing scheduled, Friday, 6 p.m. 4 days after suspension, no prior notice. The hearing was set for the clubhouse conference room. Attached was a short statement. Alleged repeated disruption of quiet pool environment during designated calm use hours. Designated calm use hours. That phrase did not exist anywhere in the handbook. I drove to the pool one more time before sunset. The deck was crowded, kids splashing, adults laughing, the speaker playing again, even louder now. I stood near the shallow end and timed it. 3 separate cannonballs within 2 minutes. A whistle blew once, but only to signal adult swim rotation. Not noise, not quiet enforcement. As I turned to leave, I noticed something mounted above the clubhouse entrance I hadn't paid attention to before. A small black dome camera, pointed directly toward the keycard reader. Every access attempt recorded. Every timestamp logged. If the board was claiming repeated violations during calm use hours, those hours would have to be defined somewhere. And if they weren't defined, then any enforcement based on them would collapse under scrutiny. Friday was approaching, and for the first time, the situation was no longer about my kids' embarrassment. It was about whether a board could invent authority after the fact. The real question now was this: what exactly would they present as proof when the hearing began?
Friday evening arrived with the kind of stillness that makes small rooms feel smaller. The clubhouse conference room had folding chairs arranged in 2 neat rows. A long plastic table sat at the front with 3 board members seated behind it, a pitcher of water, a stack of printed papers, a small voice recorder placed in the center. Through the glass wall behind them, the pool was still open. Kids splashed under the fading sunlight. A lifeguard rotated chairs. A beach ball bounced off the water and hit the coping with a hollow thud. 2 separate worlds, one carefree, one procedural. My children sat beside me in the second row, quiet but composed. The HOA president began. "This hearing concerns repeated violation of calm use expectations during designated calm use periods." I watched carefully as she slid a printed sheet forward. It wasn't a handbook excerpt. It was a single-page document titled Pool Courtesy Guidelines, Draft. Draft. No revision date. No adoption vote noted. No distribution record. "When was this adopted?" I asked evenly. "It reflects long-standing community expectations," she replied. "That wasn't my question." A board member cleared his throat. "The board has discretion to clarify behavioral standards." Outside, through the glass, a teenager jumped off the diving board and did a loud belly flop. The slap echoed faintly into the room. No one inside reacted. The HOA president continued. "Your children were repeatedly observed throwing objects and generating excessive splashing during calm use periods." "What are calm use periods?" my daughter asked quietly. There was a pause. "Generally mid-afternoon when residents seek relaxation," she answered. "Is that written anywhere in the official rules?" I asked. She didn't respond directly. Instead, she slid another page forward, a printed email complaint from an anonymous resident. It read, Children being disruptive near Shallow End around 4 p.m. No timestamps, no video, no lifeguard report. I leaned back slightly. Before we proceed, I said, I'd like to clarify the sequence of enforcement. The board nodded cautiously. On Saturday, my children were removed from the pool at approximately 4:15 p.m. Their key cards were deactivated within minutes. Their names were publicly posted. No written notice preceded that action. No hearing was scheduled until 4 days later. Silence. The security guard, seated near the back wall, shifted in his chair. I continued. The handbook requires written notice and opportunity for hearing prior to suspension. The HOA president interjected. Immediate suspension is permitted under discretionary authority in the interest of maintaining order. Where is that stated? Another pause.
Outside, a whistle blew sharply, signaling the end of Adult Swim. A group of kids ran back toward the deep end, water sloshing loudly over the tile edges. The timing couldn't have been clearer. I reached into my folder and removed 3 printed pages. These are copies of the official rulebook downloaded from the resident portal on Monday, footer date March 2022. No amendments regarding pool quiet hours, no emergency revisions filed. I slid them across the table. One board member leaned forward and flipped through quickly. I placed another sheet beside it. This is the property management company's written confirmation that no rule amendments have been recorded. The HOA president's expression tightened. That doesn't negate the board's discretion, she said. Discretion, I replied carefully, does not override procedural requirements. Then I placed the final document on the table. A printed screenshot of the pool access log summary I had formally requested from management 2 days earlier. It showed, Saturday, entry 3:52 p.m. Saturday, exit 4:14 p.m. My kids had left 1 minute before removal. The access log also showed no prior warnings, no prior incident reports, and no prior restrictions. A board member looked up sharply. Where did you obtain this? Through a formal resident request. The system records every keycard entry and exit. Outside, through the glass, the Bluetooth speaker started playing again. Laughter erupted near the diving board. Inside the conference room, no one spoke for several seconds. I wasn't finished. There is also camera footage, I added evenly, mounted above the entry panel, time-stamped. The HOA president blinked. And I assume, I continued, if this board intends to justify suspension, it will rely on documented policy and documented behavior. Another silence. My children sat still, hands folded in their laps. The board members exchanged glances. The narrative had shifted. This was no longer about noise. It was about whether the board had followed its own rules, and if they hadn't, the only question left was this: would they defend discretion or admit procedural failure?
The room felt smaller after the access log hit the table. One board member adjusted his glasses and leaned toward the printed timestamps again. Entry at 5:52, exit at 4:14, he read quietly. The HOA president straightened in her chair. That doesn't address the behavioral issue. It addresses duration, I replied, and the absence of any prior warning. Outside the glass wall, 2 children sprinted along the pool edge despite the posted no running sign. A lifeguard blew a whistle once and gestured them back. The moment passed. Laughter resumed. Inside, the board's recorder light blinked red. I reached into my folder again. There's another procedural issue, I said calmly. I placed a printed page in front of them, the disciplinary procedures section of the handbook, highlighted. Suspension requires written notice and opportunity for hearing prior to enforcement, except in cases of immediate safety threat. I let that phrase sit in the air. Was there a safety threat? I asked. No one answered immediately. The HOA president folded her hands. Repeated disruptive activity can escalate. But did it? I asked. Silence. I turned slightly and gestured toward the pool outside. At that exact moment, someone executed a cannonball near the deep end. Water splashed high enough to crest over the tile border. If splashing constitutes immediate safety risk, I continued evenly, then enforcement appears selective. One board member shifted uncomfortably. The HOA president tried a different angle. The board also has authority under insurance compliance to reduce risk exposure. That was the moment I had anticipated. I slid forward a printed email from the association's insurance provider, obtained earlier that week through a formal inquiry. Here is written confirmation from the insurer, I said. There are no underwriting requirements regarding afternoon quiet periods, ball tossing, or calm use restrictions. A board member took the page and scanned it quickly. Outside, the Bluetooth speaker near the diving board started playing music again, louder this time. A small group clapped along. The irony was almost visible. I stood and walked toward the glass wall. May I? I asked. The board nodded cautiously. I stepped just outside the conference room door and gestured toward the lifeguard. Excuse me, I called calmly. He walked over. In the past week, have you issued any written noise violations? He answered immediately. No. Have you been instructed about designated calm use hours? He hesitated. Not officially. I thanked him and returned inside. The board members avoided eye contact with one another. I resumed my seat.
This is what we have, I said clearly. No written rule establishing calm use hours, no emergency amendment filed, no documented warning issued, no safety incident recorded, suspension enacted prior to hearing, public posting of minors' names without formal adjudication. The HOA president exhaled slowly. The room was silent except for the faint echo of water outside. Then something unexpected happened. One of the quieter board members, a retired accountant who had barely spoken all evening, leaned forward. Was there a formal vote authorizing immediate suspension? He asked. The HOA president paused. It was within executive authority, she replied. That wasn't my question, he said. Another pause. No formal vote, she admitted. He looked down at the handbook again. Then procedurally, he said carefully, we may have acted out of sequence. Outside, the sun had nearly set. Pool lights flickered on automatically. Reflections rippled across the glass wall. The energy in the room shifted, not confrontational, but corrective. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't need to. This isn't about winning, I said evenly. It's about applying the same rules to everyone, including the board. The HOA president's jaw tightened. And if we rescind, she asked, then the process corrects itself, I replied. The retired accountant board member nodded slowly. But there's another concern, he added. If enforcement occurred without documented policy, we risk broader exposure. Exposure. That word changed everything. Because now it wasn't about my kids, it was about liability. The board members began quietly discussing among themselves, voices lowered but urgent. Through the glass, the security guard adjusted the gate and checked the access panel again. The blinking LEDs reflected faintly on the office wall. The evidence wasn't emotional. It was time-stamped, logged, recorded. And now the board had to decide. Would they defend an unwritten rule or acknowledge that due process had been bypassed? The board asked for a 5-minute recess. They stepped into the small office behind the conference room, closing the door halfway. Through the glass panel, I could see them speaking in low, tight motions, papers shifting, one of them gesturing toward the handbook, another tapping the insurance email with 2 fingers. Outside, the pool lights glowed against the darkening sky. Kids continued swimming. The Bluetooth speaker finally went silent as someone packed up their table.
The lifeguard stacked 2 lounge chairs near the fence. Inside, my children sat quietly beside me. "Are we in trouble?" my daughter whispered. "No," I said calmly. "We followed the rules." And that was the truth. A few minutes later, the board members returned to their seats. The HOA president looked composed, but noticeably less certain than when the hearing began. "The board has reviewed the procedural concerns raised," she began. "We acknowledge that formal written notice should have preceded suspension unless an immediate safety risk was documented." She paused. "In this case, there was no documented safety report." The retired accountant board member leaned toward the microphone. "Additionally," he added, "there is no formally adopted rule establishing designated calm use hours. Without codified policy, enforcement under that basis is not supportable." The recorder light blinked steadily. Outside the glass wall, the security guard closed the pool gate for the evening. He tapped his access card against the reader. Green light. The HOA president continued. "Effective immediately, the suspension of your children's amenity privileges is rescinded." She glanced down at her notes. "The board will also remove any public disciplinary postings related to this matter." There was no applause, no dramatic reaction, just quiet correction. But she wasn't finished. "We will place on next month's agenda a formal review of our disciplinary procedures to ensure due process requirements are consistently followed." That was the real shift, not just reinstatement, policy correction. I nodded once. "Thank you," I said evenly. The retired accountant spoke again. "For clarity," he added, "future enforcement actions will require documented notice, scheduled hearing, and recorded board vote prior to suspension, except in verified safety emergencies." The HOA president gave a small, tight nod. The process had been reset. As the meeting adjourned, we stepped outside onto the pool deck. The night air felt cooler. The water surface was calm now, lights shimmering in soft ripples. Maintenance staff rolled a large pool cover halfway across the deep end. The security guard approached with a clipboard. "I've already reactivated the keycards," he said quietly. My daughter looked at me. "Can I try it?" We walked to the gate. She held her keycard up to the reader. For half a second, nothing. Then, green light, a soft confirmation beep. My son grinned but didn't say anything. He simply pushed the gate open and stepped inside. The pool was technically closed for the night, but access was restored. That was what mattered. The next morning, I drove past the clubhouse again. The bulletin board was clean. No laminated notice, no names, just community announcements and a flyer for swim lessons. A new printed sheet had been posted beneath the rules section. Reminder: all disciplinary actions require written notice and scheduled hearing per governing documents. Small font, neutral tone, but permanent. Later that afternoon, the HOA president was outside near the mailbox cluster. She nodded when she saw me, not warmly, but professionally. That was enough. The issue had never been about noise. It had been about process, about whether authority could bypass procedure simply because no one challenged it. The keycard system had logged every entry and exit. The rulebook had recorded every revision date. The insurance provider had documented its own requirements. None of it emotional, all of it verifiable. That was the trap, not dramatic, not aggressive, just documented sequence against undocumented discretion. And when sequence doesn't align with policy, policy prevails. As my kids walked toward the pool later that weekend, towels over their shoulders, foam ball in hand, I watched them tap their cards again. Green light, access granted. And this time, everyone knew exactly why.